Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Here we have a hand from a $5, $10 no-limit cash game that I played a while back during the World Series of Poker. Here there is a limp from the player in the low jack seat. Actually, it could be button cutoff high. Yeah, from the low jack seat. And I decided to limp with jack 8 offsuit on the button. So this may look a little bit speculative, but if I am limping in the spot, I can go ahead and tell you what it means. It means that the player in seat 1, the low jack seat, is not a very good player. And it also means the player in the big blind is not a very good player. So I'm going to be limping in the spot with all sorts of hands, just trying to see the flop with a very deep stack to pot ratio. Now, of course, I could raise to something like 50 and then get called by the low jack and then hopefully have him check folding a lot of flops. But if I don't have the read that this type of player is going to be folding to my pre-flop raise very often or to my continuation bet, well, that strategy is not quite as good. Jack 8 is certainly not a good hand, but I promise you, on the button, I'm going to be over-realizing my equity in this spot by just being in position with a hand that's reasonable. So I'm okay with limping here. Small blind calls, and then a very splashy player in the big blind makes it 70. So at this point, I think folding is probably just best. It's unfortunate when you limp and then someone yet to act raises. And if you think the guy yet to act is going to raise a lot, you should very strongly consider just folding preflop, right? Like if you get the vibe that someone yet to act is going to raise, you certainly don't want to be limping in with your garbage because you're just going to have to fold, right? But this wouldn't be much of a hand if I didn't stick around. So I'm either going to re-raise or call. And I do call, and the small blind calls as well. So now we're seeing a three-way pot in position where I'm obviously slightly behind in terms of equity, but we have the button. The button's nice. All right, flop comes 9-9-4. And the very splashy guy bets 70 into the 220 pot. Again, I think this is a pretty easy fold. The only time I would justify sticking around here is if for some reason we thought this 70 bet is very weak, and also we think the player in the small blind doesn't have much. Notice here we have basically one of the worst draws we could possibly have. We have an overcard, and we have a backdoor straight draw. May not sound like much, but there really aren't a ton of great draws here. I mean, clearly Queen of Spades, Jack of Spades is way better. But this hand is, it's reasonable. If in this scenario, I think we have two options. We can either call and then look to raise a lot of turns, or we can raise immediately and try to get our opponents to fold out everything worse than a 9. So what we're trying to figure out here is how do we get our opponents to fold everything worse than trips? Is there a way to do that? Maybe not everything worse than trips, but maybe any hand pocket 8s and worse. And I don't know if a very splashy guy is going to make a fold on the flop with a hand like pocket 10s. I just don't see it happening. So I think we need to call here if we're going to play this hand and look to get after it on the turn, but just fold. Just fold, J Card Shark. You don't need to play this hand. So I call and small blind calls. But now we get there on the turn. We just drill it, no problem. And now they check to me. So I kind of assumed the very splashy player would keep betting if he had anything. So I think the very splashy players almost always check folding or check calling with a hand like ace-king. So I think we're ahead of him. The question is, how are we doing against the small blind? So the small blind's flop check calling range is going to be mostly pairs. A lot of the pairs are available. Maybe not 10s and better because most people raise those pre-flop. But he could certainly have, probably not 8s, but 7s, 6s, 5s. 4s. I mean, I guess he could slow play the 4s. 3s, 2s. He could also have hands like ace 4, maybe king 4 suited, maybe 5-4 suited. He could also have some 9s that just played it a little bit slowly. So I think betting here is actually fine, especially if we bet small, because the splashy player in the big blind is basically done. And the small blind, we're in okay shape against his range. Also notice I could just easily have a 9 and be trapping, right? So here we can bet small and get called, perhaps, by hands like 7, 6s, 5s, and stuff like ace 4. And if we get raised, we're just done with it. And if we get called, we're just done with it as well. We're checking behind on the river. Most of the time. We're not trying to turn this into a bluff. Because now if we try to bluff this on the river, or if we bet with this on the river, we're trying to either get called by 7s or worse, which is pretty tough, or get a hand like a 9 to fold, and that seems ridiculous. So, will anyone ever fold a 9? Clearly not. Backdoor flush comes in, backdoor straight comes in. I mean, I guess I could have 7-6. But again, with your hand, you always want to ask yourself, what am I trying to make fold? Here, I want to make a 9 fold, but is there any way the small blind has a 9? And I mean, probably not given the way this hand's played out, but he could still have me beat with a hand like pocket 10s or a hand like ace-8 of clubs. So here, I think I actually have the best hand a decent amount of the time, especially if it goes check-check. But if I bet the river and get called, I almost certainly don't have the best hand. So this seems like a pretty easy spot to check back. Now, what if instead of what if instead of jack 8, I had pocket 6s? I think that's a hand we certainly can consider bluffing, especially if I have the 6 of diamonds blocking the random flush a little bit. I think that could be a decent bluffing hand. I don't know if I would bet that on the turn, though. So I'm kind of having a hard time coming up with very many hands I want to be bluffing here. I mean, if I had jack 10, I would certainly bet the turn, and I guess I have to bet the river with that hand because that hand has almost no equity. So that'd be a reasonable betting hand on the river. Same thing with queen jack. If I floated with queen jack, that's another good bluffing hand on the river. Notice if I had queen jack, it'd very often be queen jack suited, in which case we made a flush sometimes. So that's good. But this is a very easy spot to check, mainly because if I bet here and get called, we're almost always behind. But if it goes check-check, I actually win quite a bit. So let's let it go check-check. It does go check-check. And we beat pocket 7, so that's pretty fortunate. I always wonder in this spot, if I was going to go with my plan of floating the flop and then betting big on the turn if they checked me, would we have gotten a hand like pocket 7s to fold? Assuming I missed my 8, of course. And I think we probably would have won this hand. So this is an example of one of these spots where if your opponent is good, they're going to win the hand with a lot of their bluffs, and they're also going to win the hand when they have their best hands. And if they're going to exploit you a little bit by using different bet sizes that induce you to do exactly the wrong thing, that can get you in a lot of trouble. So if you have not already, please go check out my newest book, Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em. There we go through lots of situations, not like this. I don't really talk about floating the flop with jack high too often, but we definitely talk about figuring out your opponent's ranges and exploiting them to the maximum. We have over 230 charts in the book going through how to play your range and how to play against your opponent's range. And if you are trying to get good at No Limit Hold'em, this is the book for you. So check it out at jonathanlittlepoker.com/mastering and let me know what you think. Be sure to check back next week for another fun poker hand here on Poker News. Thanks for watching.